The topic on the agenda is a little bit broad, and that was it. So in talking to all these fine folks about their various overlaps, what I thought about was this. We know that television was a specific thing a long time ago. It was 3 networks, and then it was 4 networks, and then maybe it was 6 networks, and then it was 5 networks again. It was studio-produced content, and it was clearly Hollywood. But what is it now? That's kind of, for a long time, been the only thing that was left that was sort of common. It was a broadcast medium. So sometime in the last year, that sort of disappeared, because you can stream it now, and you can download it now. So what is it? So just to keep things moving, I came up with a little definition myself, which is it's a 10-foot experience, it's communal, oops, that was not supposed to happen. Let me go back. That was Steve Jobs getting back at me. So it's those things, right? It's a 10-foot experience. It has communal viewing. You can watch it by yourself or with other people. It can be real-time or time-shifted, because VHS proved that a long time ago. You can have new content, or you can have old content, and it's not produced by your friend Fred, generally speaking. So the reason that matters is because of all of the new segments, people are a little bit bored maybe talking about VOD and DVR, but those are the only ones that actually provide you with that ability. Those are still the only things that meet, and we spent a lot of time in the pre-calls talking about what the perception of TV is on the mind of the viewer, not necessarily those of us who do it. And TV is still a communal experience. It's still watched in a living room, and DVR and VOD both support that. The power of the mediums probably is also the fact that they're not really TV, they're still not traditional TV, but they feel like good old TV. So with that, you kind of wind up, for the analysts of us in the room, with a SWOT, where you look at what the programming opportunities are, the advertising opportunities are across these 2 spaces, and obviously in a Venn diagram. They're related in some ways and not related in other ways. But each of these guys has a different business in a different area of this group, and I guess you guys can't see this, but it's just a little quadrant. So with that, what I'd like to do is let them tell you a little bit about their companies, and if you have a chance, also tell us a little bit about what attracted you to the space and why you are still with it, even as other things have sort of emerged. And I guess we'll start with the erstwhile Tom.
My name is Tom Morgan. I'm founder and head development officer for a company called Black Arrow. We worry about advertising on what we call the other triple play. How do you do new form, manage advertising on VOD, broadband, and DVR? Because the advertisers don't care about what kind of technology it is. All they care about is getting the right audience within the right programming context with the right campaign. So we worry about how you manage ads.
My name is Don Vogt. I'm the founder and CEO of Command Audio. We're probably I'll venture to say, one of the longer-lived companies, either in this room, not necessarily on this panel, but in this room. We were founded in 1995 and focused on delivering PVR functionality to people driving their cars. So obviously the V wasn't relevant. It was what would have been known, had TiVo been around at the time, as TiVo for radio. We are now on our 3rd business model, and it looks like this one could be successful for us. We license the IP, and we have developed over the years a number of good licensees. Our tools and technologies have been licensed by Motorola and XM, satellite radio, also Sony and Replay TV and the like. What we have developed over the years is a fairly deep sense of how people use PVR functionality, whether it's in the audio realm or the television realm. Given our original focus on the mobile consumer, the ultimate mobile consumer, a driver, we remain focused on that as ultimately the nirvana of applications. That is, the mobile consumer using PVR functionality in order to get what he or she wants when he or she wants it. That's what we do.
Hi, I'm Jeff Schultz. I'm the co-founder of Concert. Concert is a live music, television, and multi-platform video network. It's the first of its kind. It's the first nationally distributed television network dedicated to music performance and documentary, and it's also one of the first standalone video-on-demand networks, having launched 3 years ago nationwide, currently distributed to about 15 million homes through Cox and Comcast recently Adelphia, up until recently Adelphia, Charter, and Insight. We're 3 years into it. Advertisers like Singular, Starbucks, Target, Levi's, sort of world-class advertisers that have a music focus that we can bring closer to music. And to answer your question, Seth, of why I got into it, we're going to talk a lot today about the disruptive effect of VOD and the DVR, but it's important to remember that there's a constructive effect too, and one of those is making niche programming opportunities viable. And so 4 years ago, my business partner and I saw that live music was an under-addressed content category, and that we could use VOD and then ultimately, frankly, the DVR as a way to address that programming category for a national TV and video audience.
Hi, I'm Sangeeta Verma, and I am the CEO and founder of TV Head. And at TV Head, we're creating what we consider to be the next generation of networks. We're starting off with a games on demand channel, and unlike Jeff, where he's talking about taking a niche product and bringing it in through VOD, we're actually bringing a mass market product, which is games, to television. And one of the things that we'll talk about today is how we're addressing games, one as a new programming genre, but also the ability to deliver advertising and really fill a void in the gap that current TV advertising faces.
Lisa Shipnuck. I'm with IBM, and specifically within IBM, I sit in the consulting services in a business research center called the Institute for Business Value. So while we all connote IBM as a leader in technology research, we also spend a substantial amount of money in business research, and I oversee globally the media and entertainment research we do on that. About 6 months ago, we published a piece called The End of Television as We Know It, where we really talked about being in a bimodal consumer era and how suppliers really need to look at bifurcated strategies. So we can talk about that as well as many other things today.
Yeah, we will.
Very nice to be here.
I'm Beverly Zaslow. I'm with Real Time Rentals and Real Time TV. I'm Vice President of Business Development and Acquisitions. We are a broadband network that is set to launch within the next month, so we're entering this arena and this playing field. But what makes us a little bit different is that we're video on demand and rental on demand, a subscription service that will be offering point, click, and watch to the consumer. So that we've developed a proprietary technology that allows you to basically pick what you want to watch, similar to some of the other broadband networks, and you click on it, the picture comes up within seconds, and you are watching what is a near DVD quality picture. You can blow it up to any size television, and you will retain the DVD quality. It's streaming in real time, and that's, I'm going to say, in many ways, the major difference. How I came to this, interestingly enough, is that years ago I was involved I've been in television for many, many years in the entertainment business, and I produced a series on technology in the late 90s and knew what was coming, knew that video was the killer application, so I saw a lot of what was in the future, and I believe that now we're there, of course. And so I think this is a wave of the future. I don't think that we're turning any other direction, and as far as being a disruptive force, I would agree that I don't know that I'd call it that. I think it's just that certainly in the entertainment industry, you're always looking for new business models and ways to be able to produce and make money, and this is certainly a new revenue stream that is going to be moving forward.
That's great. And I'm Seth Shapiro. I'm a consultant now with Time Warner Cable and Viacom and some others. Previously, I was head of production for Interactive and DVR DirecTV, so I know some of you from there. And I actually want to start there because one of the things that I worked on extensively was the TiVo integration at DirecTV. And I guess this question goes primarily to maybe Tom or Don or Louisa, but there were some pretty reasonable DVR-based advertising models early on. There's telescoping ads. There were some decent measurement tools. There were adding bugs to existing 30-second inventory. Why hasn't it happened? Why do we think that that still really hasn't become a viable platform? Is it just fear? Is it fear that the ads are going to get skipped? Because if you're afraid that the ads are going to get skipped, why don't you do something about it and add things to the ads? Please, sir.
Most of the issues, I think, are more business related than they are technology related. The panel earlier, Andy As was talking about the issue that the operators tended to want to, since they were putting out 95% of the DVRs put in the marketplace are put out by the cable or satellite companies. And the cable guys decided that VOD was what they were going to do. They tried not to open up their DVRs. They fought off the programmers trying to provide inventory. So no one's ever really built a decent business model on the DVR side. And then many of the middleware technology problems on like the NDS box and the rest means the DVR, which is the biggest problem, is the last of the marketplace. It's a huge problem. It's going to create about 40 billion hours. By the 08 upfronts, we forecast it's going to create about $40 billion of television watching that'll be outside the revenue stream of television because of the ad skipping problem. And yet it's the last of the technologies that will come online with new ad models.
Wow. Don?
Well, I'd point to just a couple of statistics. I think it's Instat who published a large research report in April, their annual update on PVRs. And they pointed out that 90% of PVR owners or DVR owners skip all the ads. And 90% of the PVR owners would not agree to a service that inserted ads, even if it meant that they got their PVR for free. So I think the audience here is an audience, 25, 28, 30% of people now have PVRs. It's still early in the life of this business and early in the life of this market, and there's lots of time for it to develop. I think what's important is developing things that people cannot skip at the press of a button, and that's a hard thing to do.
So Stream's got it right this year, right? But DVR's had so a streaming service that doesn't allow you to skip ads becomes a tremendous advantage over a DVR-based service in that case, unless DVR services do something about competing.
Right, as long as you're willing to do what 90% of your customers don't want you to do.
But actually, just to interject here, there's a very different, measurements are very inexact, and when you ask consumers to self-report, they often overinflate the amount of replay they're doing, the amount of ad skipping they're doing. And so when you see Forrester or Instat asking for those to self-report, you're hearing that 60% is on replay, 90% is on ad skipping, but when you're actually looking at the Nielsen TiVo statistics, you're seeing a very, very different story, with about 35% of prime time on replay and about 70% within 1 hour of the time being broadcast. So it's a far less grim picture, at least with today's user, although today's user is potentially much more advanced than tomorrow's user. The other thing is about current penetration rates. What I've seen is about 15% penetration in the U.S. I think the number I heard was a little bit different from another panelist, but maybe I misheard that. And that is about double or triple what we're seeing in Europe, and it's much more advanced than what we're seeing in what we're seeing in Asia Pac. So this is something that people are really grappling with the implications of. But self-reporting in terms of measurement is very, very different than exact use. So I think the jury is out on what the real diminishment of advertising will be. But even though we've run the numbers, as it sounds like others have done, on the at-risk amount of advertising. So when we ran the numbers, we came up with about $20 billion at risk in the next 4 or 5 years. And that is predicated on 50% replay and 50% ad skipping. So you can play with those numbers in any way you want. But is at risk really the same thing as lost advertising? And we would say it isn't, because the advertiser shows a great deal of inertia and emotional attachment to their current models. And we even see that with the amount of spending still happening on broadcast networks versus cable networks. So if we're not even seeing them going to a more niche user base in terms of cable channels, where is that going to continue to go with one-to-one or more individualized usership? So that's a question to pose.
Yeah, I agree with your stats, and I agree with the concept of at risk. However, in this year's upfronts, ABC lost the battle for including the Live Plus 7 window in the debate.
Absolutely. So you get a very small DVR discount in terms of that, and upfronts were still flat with last year. So despite the fact that there was a great deal of concern, the bottom didn't drop out.
Okay. If you run that, agree with 15% in installed base,
yep.
and
it'll catch up,
40 or
absolutely.
50, so some number of those of that viewing is time shifted, and some number of those ads are skipped.
Absolutely,
it's probably
totally
more like
agree.
50 or 60%.
And for those of us on the panel, probably 100%.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and we've run a thing called AdLab for the last 2 years that has a lot of focus groups in usability testing. We have General Motors, Procter & Gamble, Coke, NBC, MTV working in AdLab. testing it. And what we're finding is that consumers don't object to advertising. What they object to is, here's television. I'm watching CSI. Somebody raises a knife to get murdered. And what do? You go to break. And you go to a big break, and when they come back, somebody dies. And my daughter, who's really good at the remote, says, no way, I'm seeing who's getting murdered. So television's programmed in a DVR household exactly the incorrect way to incite somebody to engage with ads, because it's interrupting at the most important time of the show.
Yeah, and to both
you
of
gotta
you,
start thinking of it in a different way.
and to both of your points, if you're going to seed a new ad model and you start asking people, are you going to skip ads that are, are potentially a new mechanism that might be better, and you don't show them those ads, and you just say you're going to skip ads, who's not going to say they're going to skip ads?
Right, and when you introduce a new screen or a new format, you can also hit the reset button with user expectations, and we see that with abc.com. Users really didn't object to the ads. In fact, there was a double or triple recall, and the vast majority said they thought it was a great deal in terms of getting what they termed free content. So when you introduce a new model, you also can hit the reset button, I think.
Yeah, and people don't.
Sorry, I would just add that whether we take the Instat numbers, which may be wrong or not wrong compared to others, what we found in our own research was that consumer demand for the service and the price they would pay actually goes up with advertising. As long as you let them hear or see advertising about things that interest them. So there is a demand. Advertising is viewed as a legitimate source of information. I just don't want to hear about cleanser. I want to hear about BMWs.
And might I also add that commercials are becoming more entertaining, and I think that the Super Bowl clearly points that out, that people will watch advertising if it's something that engages them. And not just that, but in terms of programming, there's now such a movement towards not going DTC and shoving the product down the consumers, down their throats, but also embedding it right into the programming and integrating it in so that it has more relevancy in terms of what the advertising is.
Great. So go ahead,
Hey,
please.
Seth, I was gonna add that I think that that this is a great illustration of the fact that the DVR is not creating the problem. The problem pre-existed. The DVR exposed the problem. Here's the problem in my mind. Media companies get paid this way in the television business today. Deliver weak creative to the wrong audience with no relevance and little verification, and they get paid, right? It shouldn't have existed as long as it did. And so what VOD, and to a more sort of visible extent, the DVR is doing is exposing that problem. And so if you sell $1 billion, or God forbid $10 billion of 30-second spots, that's some tough news to swallow. But for new entrants or people that are trying to create new solutions, it's nothing but an opportunity. So let's get in front of this problem. It's what I do on a day-to-day basis, to work with advertisers to try to come up with solutions that I don't sweat the fast forward button in video on demand. My advertising is integrated in a way that it's a non-issue,
That's a perfect segue. So first of all, who's going to give up an inefficient mechanism that's paying them pretty well to maintain that inefficient mechanism? So if old advertising models and CPM systems are going to pay your salary, you're probably not going to be in a hurry to dispose of them so quickly. But VOD has obviously opened up a lot of new advertising opportunities, and at least 3 of you guys are engaged in that full time. So why don't we just start with you and talk about advertising on Concert.
Sure, you got it. I'll be happy to walk you through the model and how it's different. But you know what else? What's interesting along that point about sort of people whose bread is buttered by the current model are not in a hurry to fix it. Commercial ratings. Right? It could have been fixed years ago in the form of second-by-second commercial ratings. The fact is that changing channel during a commercial is a more effective disengagement than fast forwarding. There's an argument during a fast forward you absorb some of the message. There's cool tools that we're going to talk about today, in terms of overlaying a different ad or finding another way to deliver a message during a fast forward. When you change channels, they're gone, and they're doing it every day today, and none of it's being measured. Anyway, that's my rant. So the Concert model, the Concert video on demand advertising model is, let's listen to advertisers. Advertisers, 3 or 4 years ago, they said, we can't engage with customers. There's too much clutter. We can't create relevant messaging. Our customers don't appreciate the brand the way it's being presented today. So we say, let's take music and let's take a 20 or 30 minute program as sort of a blank slate, and let's figure a way to take brands the right brands, maybe 50 or 100. There's hundreds that I can't do business with under these rules, under this model, and get them close to music. What does that mean in terms of a timeline? Short, sweet, effective, creative. Before a program runs, maybe 15 seconds. During a program, no interruptions. The longest thing that will happen is in the lull between songs, 10 or 15 seconds. If you have video on demand, you know there's a sort of a latency that you wouldn't fast forward through 10 seconds. You wouldn't be able to stop in time and back up. And so we found that 10 or 15 seconds, it's an effective way to avoid fast forward. And then at the end, if you have the right advertiser, there's some real estate to do some fun stuff. We do a lot of business with the studios, and so at the beginning, movie studios. So at the beginning of the program, it might say stick around for an exclusive trailer, and so that's where we get people sticking around until the end, and they'll agree. They'll intentionally watch a 60-second or a 2-minute ad at the end of the program, and so the one reason why this isn't sort of a ubiquitous model, a model that anyone can run with, is I have the luxury of music, where I'll talk to Singular or Levi's or Target or a Starbucks, and they have a music goal, a music product or a music focus, and I can get them close to music. It would be harder in other categories, but I think that's where everyone in their own category would have to find a way to work for them, for gardening, or for anime, or for whatever it might be, games, plenty of opportunity there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Also, so with trailers, obviously you've got a great ad opportunity that's right on the border between advertising and information, useful information to people generally. But doesn't it sort of feel like with the advent of more VOD outlets, theoretically every advertiser should have some sort of content that they're meaningfully related to, where it's not so much an interruption? I mean, I'm just throwing that out to you.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a short and medium term difficulty in terms of content creation or creative.
And obviously you guys have a sweet spot because everybody loves music and everybody wants to be identified with it. But
absolutely, and we part of what we did as a business, this is sort of a good illustration. A big part of what we do with the people that work for us is creating messaging, right? Really innovative, creative messaging during the program. We had to take on that burden because creative agencies today aren't necessarily in a position to do that, and so that's kind of the short and medium term hurdle where in theory, there should be content that corresponds to just about every category, but it's really not available today, and it'll take some time for it to be available. I've got an anecdote it's just an anecdote, but I think it proves part of the point. A few weeks ago, we got an email from one of our viewers, and we get emails all the time saying, "God bless you, thank you, you're here. I can't believe someone programmed, Donovan Frankenreiter or Gomez or Wolfmother." And that's kind of what concert is. It's in September it's Tom Jones and Tupac. That's concert it's for music fans. It's everything. But this particular person took the time to thank us and said, "Please thank Singular," because Singular had been the presenting sponsor. And so obviously I sent it right off to them. But the point being, we obviously not only effectively got the message across. They understood that Singular had sponsored the program, but we did it in a way with a low commercial load and effective creative messaging that they actually appreciated.
That created a halo effect.
Yep.
And also, with what Jeff's saying, I was with PBS, and I know that we had all kinds of statistics about what people thought about PBS as being able to deliver a message that wasn't an advertised message and it wasn't cluttered. But in truth, in terms of who we were going after to sponsor different television shows, it was just a way to have more creative kinds of advertising, but we weren't allowed to use that word. And it was not going directly, again, at the customer and saying, if you had an insurance company, for example, that was sponsoring Antiques Roadshow or something, if you were going to have their spot on the air, you couldn't say, and we are selling this. You couldn't have a call to action per se for a particular product, but you could say, insuring the world, things like that. So the message is a little bit different, and it's something that people accept, and they remember it because they appreciate what it's associated with, and they think that and I don't know if people actually make the correlation that this is the company paying for it, so that's why they get this, but they do somehow or another get that message.
I think that's so fair, and I wouldn't have brought it up myself, but my business partner, he introduces our business model sometimes, our advertising model, as a for-profit PBS type model, because a sponsor is enabling a program, one sponsor per program, and so you can just ratchet down the commercial load dramatically and still get an effective sort of association.
And I used to walk around at our offices and I'd say, just because we're a not-for-profit doesn't mean we can't be profitable, because the idea always was, go after, if you're going to come up with a topic and you can produce a show about anything, it doesn't matter, go after something. If you want to target the pharmaceutical companies, do a medical series, do a series that's of women's health or whatever it is, and approach it just a little bit from the back as opposed to just going head on.
That's great. So I want to get to Sangeeta, but before I do, in terms of product placement and sort of Fox F-150 on 24 kind of opportunities, have you guys, or maybe you, done any research in terms of the differences in effectiveness of traditional spots versus that sort of really smart product placement? Do we have any sense of the effectiveness?
Not primary research. I tell you, brand positioning is interesting, but it's very difficult to monetize that. It's, a lot of it's done as cost offset for production and the rest. But the idea of using it as a visual cue to somebody says, oh, that's interesting, and I can pause the show or the programming and go look at that, and then what we call round trip, come back to the show right where I let off, where I don't lose control.
Right.
Then you can use it as a visual cue.
So you're pausing the show, you're going off looking at the ad avail, and then coming back to the show right where you left it.
So the product placement isn't the ad, the product placement is the visual cue for the long form that sits underneath it. If you go that way, then there's some pretty interesting stuff that research bears out.
Right. So I'm just going to jump in and tell you a little bit about what TV Head is doing, because again, building the next generation of television networks, we think sponsorship is great, we think Adver Games is great, being that we're a games channel. But our approach to advertising, what we are able to deliver to the advertiser, is actual data. We can say, you know what, it was a woman, 47 years old, she interacted with your brand for 6 minutes, and she ordered a catalog. Because when they come into our channel and play, we know who they are. And that then allows us to also target specifically for demographics. So let's say Procter & Gamble is...
Because they have to log in. They have to log in to play the game.
So when
when
they first come to the channel, and I hate to use the word login because it sounds just so PC.
I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
This is television. So when they first come to the channel, they set up a username, and that username is used for their high scores, for multiplayer. It's their persona, but they also have the ability to set the channel to their preferences. So if they, for example, like to play Tetris a certain way, they set it the first time, the system remembers them. If they have my favorites categories where they're selecting games, it's an easy way for them to get to those games. So there's a lot of reasons why a consumer would want to set their username. And when they do that, we ask them 3 other questions. We ask them if they're male or female, the year they were born, and their zip code. And then the next time that they come in, or any other time they come into the channel, it basically will say, welcome whoever, and they can say, I'm Ted, I'm Susan, I'm Sangeeta, with just a push of a button.
And you're being too modest, because the other really powerful thing about that is you can do 8 logins.
Yeah, you can. We do
logins or identities.
Right, exactly. So 8 users per household.
So you've defeated something which hopefully we can talk about a little bit, which is with TV. How do you know who's watching in the household?
Right.
So you've got specific member of household data.
Right, and they tend to be, there's always the thing of, well, are they going to tell you the truth? And they tend to actually be truthful because they're very invested in their high scores and their profiles. They want to make sure they're getting credit for all of that stuff.
And in terms of advergaming, branding games against specific advertisers, is there a specific strategy to which game goes with which advertiser, or are there any examples of that?
Oh, sure. So in the advergaming side, for example, we've got a game called Beach Solitaire, and that's a natural advergame for Club Med, Sandals Beach Resort, even Corona. So the games are designed, I shouldn't say the games are designed for advertisers, but there are games with themes that make sense for certain advertisers. And we have a variety of ways to do advertising. Advergames is one. We can do in-game we can do in-game placements. So imagine a pool table and there's a logo on the pool table, and that logo can change dynamically. But frankly, the one that I'm most excited about is that we can do video interstitials between games, between levels. And so coming back to the VOD model here, when someone plays their game and it's over, they see a 5 to possibly 15-second little video that comes up, and let's just say they see a video for BMW. Well, at any point during that ad, they can hit OK on their remote control, and it takes them to what we call a micro channel, which is, I would say similar to a VOD long form. They can find out more about the product there. They can customize the car. They can pick out colors. They can have a brochure mailed to them. And if it were, let's say not BMW, but a Nike ad, they could actually order the apparel right there on the TV and have it sent to them. And then what I love about this is, as a consumer, if you like if you want more information about a product, it's right there for you at a click of a button. You don't have to go to the internet, you don't have to call an 800 number, it's there. And then again, for the advertiser, we're able to deliver exactly who it is that is participating with their brand. Jumping back to, I think, the example I was talking about, if Procter & Gamble decides that they want to launch a detergent and they only want 30 to 40-year-old women to see that ad, we can say, great, every time a 30 to 40-year-old woman fits that profile, comes into the channel, she is the only one that sees that ad. And that also then comes back to consumer satisfaction, is that if you're a 16-year-old boy playing Texas Hold'em with your buddies, you're not going to be interrupted with a Pampers commercial. You know, maybe you're going to see the ad for the latest concert that's coming into town.
That's great. So let's change gears a little bit. Actually, Louisa did part of a study. Did you want to talk about real time a little bit now, or we'll get to it later? Is that okay? All right, good. So I want to talk about this massive, passive gatekeeper sort of phenomena that you guys were looking at IBM, because maybe it's relevant to VOD and DVR. Why the take rates aren't higher, why people are not sort of getting with the system a little bit more quickly.
Well, in publishing this paper, we really looked at not just the supply side, but also the demand side of the equation in terms of new services, new devices, new experiences. And clearly we think suppliers of all forms, whether the devices, access, content suppliers, will lay the foundation for change, but it is user adoption, which will be uneven by segments, will determine the overall marketplace picture. And so we really looked at a 3 to 5 year time frame. We think the world's going to look very different in half a generation of users or a generation of users away. But what does it mean in the short term? And obviously for IBM's consulting clients, what does it mean for them in terms of short-term strategies? And so we really mapped out a segmentation scheme that works for us, and it gets a lot of, at least, conversations starting. Everybody has their different ways of looking at the consumer landscape. But we looked at 3 groups. The first we call the massive passives, and we estimate, based on a whole series of sizing sets of analyses, that they comprise about 80% of the world as we know it today. And they are not a group that particularly invests a lot of time or money in their media experiences. They need a high degree of service. They need truck rolls into the home. They need someone else to set up the wiring for them. And we think that, in part the reason the DVR has taken off recently, I mean, it's certainly been around for a while, as Seth said, but the reason it's taken off from recently is because it does come with service wrappers now, and it does take someone coming into the home and setting it up for you. We think the other 20% is what many people call a lean-forward set of consumers, and we split those into 2. We think of them as the gadgeteers, the gadget-obsessed group that probably represents many of us here at this conference, and then also the cool kids, as we call them, sort of the subculture, 18 subculture, 22-year-olds who have a very high dependency on their mobile phones, P2P, social networking, and so forth. And we think each of those 3 groups needs a very different set of pricing, content bundles, and service levels. And so we really look at how our clients then need to face this bimodality, the massive passives, and then everybody else. And so we look at it as an 80-20 split today. Clearly that changes in half a generation of users. It changes slowly between now and then. We talked to other groups that do similar types of things. For example, MTV does a similar type of segmentation scheme, and they do it as 70-30. So our splits, we think, at a gut level are fairly close, but we call that the bimodality, and we really think suppliers then need to face each mode very, very differently.
So to some extent, in that model, you've got a situation where a platform is in the same situation as a CE company, right? There's a device. You want people to use iPods, or you want them to use some sort of MP3 player. Well, VOD to some extent is that sort of a problem, except there's not one specific manufacturer. It's not even a device, it's a service concept. So does anybody have any ideas about how people or cable companies specifically could more effectively get the word out about what the value proposition of this stuff is? Anybody want to take that?
I have some ideas. It's not about time shifting, right? And that's one of the differentiators that hasn't been made clear to consumers in my mind. That the DVR is the best time shifter, and so video on demand isn't about watching programs that you might watch on regular television later. I think that maybe HBO on demand and Showtime on demand those are the exceptions, because there's just been such a high uptake of watching The Sopranos a couple days later.
Because the brand identity is so high that they don't need any additional stuff. People are just going to it as an ancillary thing, where instead of having to record it or whatever, they can just go there and know that they can get it, and HBO is co-marketing with it and so forth.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. The visibility of the particular shows is so high, and they're so discreet within their own context. HBO has really 1, maybe 2, at a time. So if it's not about time shifting, it's about differentiated programming, and that's where Concert and programmers like us come in, where we say, you know, we're embracing this. It's not going to be a storage device. We're not just going to throw 15 or 20 hours on the server and see what happens. Program it like a magazine. You know, we publish Concert every 2 weeks. There's another 10 hours of new programming, you know, another 20 or 30 programs for viewers to see. And every time we do that, there's a marketing message built in. September, we're giving away a signed guitar by Motley Crue, together with a fantastic live performance. And this is a marketing hook that our cable partners can use in saying that this is available here and it's not available anywhere else. It's certainly not available on satellite right now. And they embrace that. Now, to what extent, you know, some more than others, and in a perfect world, they'd embrace it, you know, to a far greater extent. One of the ways how we're trying to push that to the next level is we've licensed an exclusive live music series. Later with Jools Holland from the BBC will exist only on Concert on cable video on demand. And that's something extraordinary for a cable operator to tell people about. Is they can say, hey, you know, video on demand is the way you can get this programming. You can't get it anywhere else. And then original programs that we'll be producing with our cable operator partners. That last domino to fall was a sign that they really are taking this seriously. They're bringing dollars to bear to produce programming that will exist only on video on demand. To again prove that this is a place to experience extraordinary and unique programming, more so than just shifting the program in time, which is something that maybe most importantly, satellite can do just like cable.
Mm-hmm. Taking that a step further, it also allows you to do, from a perspective of being a network, of being able to have all kinds of programming, it lets us delve into different niches. So we can have, whether it's cult programming or we have a category for music or we have a category, I mean, we can add any kind of a category that we want, and we can have programming that you really can't find anywhere else. Not that it doesn't exist, but there's no one place. I don't like to think of us as an aggregator, but there's no one place where it all does exist that you can go and just be able to pick it out. I know that right now we're talking about, well, how do we deal with the advertisers on that? Because we're going after a subscriber-based kind of a business model or pay-per-view. But there are those consumers that don't want to pay, and so we're playing when we're toying with different ideas because we have the ability to go after what you're saying, especially with Motley Crue. It's an extremely qualified audience. I mean, those are buyers. They'll spend a lot of money, the fans of Motley Crue, and it's very qualified. So when you have niche programming, you're able to go after very, very qualified audiences.
Have you been able to develop, especially in the VOD environment, an ad inventory that you think builds you enough revenue to niche that kind of programming? Because right now the only ad model is a pre-roll. That's 1 unit per hour or 1 unit per show.
We're talking about different ideas in-house. We have different companies coming to us saying, we can do this, we can do that. We have, we're working with some different ideas. We're playing with the ideas right now because that's not our business model, but it's something that we're certainly not closing our, we're not turning a blind eye to.
I mean, the difficult problem is that television is predicated on about 32 avails per linear hour, of which 20 avails are direct revenue to the programmer, if you will. If you got a $25 CPM, you get about 50 cents prime time television per viewing hour. In VOD, you get a pre-roll. That's 1 unit. I don't care how much targeting you can do, one pre-roll with targeting doesn't a business model make.
No, it doesn't.
And therein lies the problem.
But in niche programming in general, so when you take different categories, you may be able to segment it out and say, well, for this could be sponsored by a group, or you can just get into the categories and you can grow whatever category you want. We know that animation is disproportionately watched for whatever reason, so you can really play that up, and there are just different ways to, but we're examining those different possibilities.
So I have your slide up. Do you want to talk people through it a little bit? Because this is sort of some of the cold, hard realities from your perspective of the situation.
Why don't you have the pie chart if you can?
I don't think I have the pie chart.
Okay, well, basically the bottom line is if you look at the viewing hours of broadband, VOD and DVR. Broadband right now is about, broadband video is about 600 million hours. VOD is at about 3 billion hours. And DVR usage right now, what does it bill? About 40 billion hours right now? And the problem is that television has about 32 avails per hour. VOD has about 1 per hour. And if you look at the long form streaming over at like ABC.com or the recently announced CBS.com, it's 3 or 4 avails per viewing hour. Example on ABC.com, if you go take a stream on broadband and use Akamai or something like that, it costs you about 50 cents a gig to stream a show. And that's about 15 cents per linear hour at a reasonable bandwidth. Well, if you have 3 avails per hour and with targeting or sponsorship, you get about a $50 CPM versus an average television CPM, a good television CPM of $20 to $25 CPM. You're going to make 15 cents per linear hour on your sponsorship model, and your cost of stream is 15 cents. I paid Akamai, and I haven't paid anybody else. And in VOD, if I take my show and I'm not getting 32 avails or 50 cents per hour, but I stick it up over there, cannibalize my broadcast show, but I get 1 avail, and even with targeting get a $50 CPM, I get 1 ad per linear hour, and I don't have a very good model there. The problem for all the programmers here is a lack of inventory. And it doesn't mean a lack of inventory inside the show. It's just a lack of vehicles on these alternative channels that build something that the consumer is willing to engage with, even with a premium that gets them a better economic model.
How many hours did you say of advertising time we're throwing away by DVR right now? It's like 32,000 or some crazy.
Okay, we forecast the amount of the Live Plus 7 window for the 08 upfronts, the next 24 months. And even with a 40% with minute-by-minute ratings, 40% of the ads recaptured because of minute-by-minute ratings went back into the Nielsen as it was viewed even though it was time-shifted. We think by the 08 upfronts, by the 08 selling season, television will have 41 billion hours where the ads are fast-forwarded through. You know, it's not 90%, but it's still time-shifted show is still a lot. And it also, by the way, varies wildly based on type of DVR you have. A TiVo fast-forward phenomenon is very different than an NDS box at DirecTV, very different. A dish box is, so that it's not all one-size-fits-all kind of phenomena. And if you view 40 billion hours being where the ads are skipped and therefore they are outside of the actually being paid for, times 32 avails per linear hour, that comes up to be 1.365 trillion avails that are outside the revenue stream of television by 08. DoubleClick did about 1.2 trillion avails last year on the internet. I mean, the size of the problem is formidable over the next 24 months as DVRs especially come online upwards of the 40% range. And it's a pretty big number.
I think, and if I ran a bigger company than Concert, I'd be worried. Someday. You know, the disconnect is that the way to translate that analysis to upcoming programmers like myself is the 30-second spot, and I threw it out a long time ago. So the fact is that there's not 1 avail in a 20-minute concert program. In fact, there's an effective 5. Right?
Okay,
there's an effective 5, and because I've ratcheted down advertisers to 1, they're paying a premium because of the effectiveness of the delivery. And because it's music, and I'm only doing business with the 50 brands for whom music makes a lot of sense, they're paying even more. And so what I'm saying is that, not that I'm, God forbid, overcharging anybody, what I'm saying is that we are starting from the ground up, creating an advertising product that is particularly well suited and that has nothing to do with 30-second spots. The only reason why we still deal in 30-second spots was going back to that sort of short and medium term creative issue. You know, the creative currency right now is often 30-second spots, so we'll find a way to work with it. But you know, for an aggressive programmer that can sort of start over from scratch, it's not true that 1 VOD program equals 1 avail.
But in a DVR model, where, to take the dish box as an example, you press a button and you skip forward 30 seconds, are you not just skipping 3 of your avails, whereas you used to be skipping 1? I mean, how do you
certainly, but if they're not necessarily interstitial.
And it's a harder problem to solve, I think. You know, but if we could sort of fast forward, if you built again the broadcast model from scratch with video on demand, the DVR in mind, it wouldn't look like it looks now. There wouldn't be 2-minute commercial spots. So if we could just wipe the board clean and start over, we could develop an advertising scheme that would work in light of the DVR and not be something so artificial as like putting up, it'll work, but putting up a logo or something like that. Something far more creative and far more fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And that would, I think...
Totally agree. There are some really good models. Let me give you one other stat that's the good news. If you look at the cost per click on AdSense or Yahoo, in Yahoo you can tell what people are bidding. Players like General Motors, you can look over in Yahoo and see what they're bidding for that top cost per click bid. They're bidding about $1 to $1.10. In fact, the categories over on the cost per click model in the internet that are television advertisers average about $1.50 per click. $1.50 per click is the equivalent of about 3 hours of primetime television watching in terms of direct revenue. A well-qualified lead directed at something that's very engaging, less clutter, higher value, higher satisfied advertiser along the lines you're going to is a new economic model of advertising that's not just putting 32 ads in the middle of a show and forcing my daughter to be really upset, which is where you're going.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, what is advertising? It's influencing consumer behavior, and it's more valuable to do that this year than it was last year. It'll be more valuable to do that next year than it was this year. So the problem is effectively influencing consumer behavior, and so CPC is a great example of models that are working, and so thus are attracting a premium price.
So the trick is, how do you engage the consumer in a relevant way? They're in control, they're not going to release it.
That's exactly right. And again, I think I'm a little fortunate that my business partner and I picked live music, because it's a place that we've found a sweet spot in bringing brands close to consumers. And you know, like that anecdote, I hope there's more of them, like that anecdote illustrated, our consumers, our viewers don't mind. They appreciate it. I think it could be far more difficult for
the hit shows.
Far more difficult for primetime programming and for the big programmers.
The first interactive service we launched at DirecTV was actually Wink, for those of you who remember it, and I feel bad for you if you do. And they had a guy who used to throw out this metric. It shows that an RFI was worth 40x of a CPM exposure, which sounds good on its face. The thing that I still wonder is, if that's so intuitively obvious to everybody, why hasn't it happened? So I guess one last question that I have, and then we'll throw it open to the floor, is, are the limits to this thing becoming the business that we all think it can be, primarily just a matter of evolution, or does it require a revolution? I know that there are potentially some infrastructural issues in terms of spot insertion, and potentially psychological issues at the ad agencies, but just maybe we can just sort of go down the line and tell us what you think has to happen in order for this thing to really flourish. You want to start?
No. Most of them are business issues. The things, besides the technology, we can solve the technology problems. It's the business relationship by the people putting the technology out and the people programming the platforms. And the panel before in this room addressed it, which is, you have to reinvent the ad model. You have to come up with a new avail, split, or carriage relationship between the people putting the technology out, the cable and satellite operators, and the innovative programmers on the dais, and come up with a win-win model that incites people to put out new forms of advertising that consumers are willing to engage with.
And do you want to talk about spot insertion and technical issues around that, or something? Well, because it seems to be a fairly ubiquitous thing. I mean, can you do dynamic ad insertion?
The problem is, even if you can do it, how many can you do? We're not going to see 32 avails in the new generation on demand. I don't care. Look at even ABC over in ABC.com isn't putting 32 avails, or putting 3 or 4. So even if we can do what's called DPI, digital program insertion, the real standpoint is, getting back to my daughter, she's not going to stand for it, and she's going to go blow by it. You make it your sponsor up there in insertion, but you're going to find other places to engage the consumer.
Don?
Yeah, I would say, return to your original question, that the real problem is with Louisa's 80% massive passives. I think in this area of the country in particular, we tend to way overestimate consumers' willingness to do anything differently, particularly if it's related to technology. So I think that adoption of these forms is, by its very nature, a long-term proposition. Hinging it on changes in consumer behavior is probably a dodgy proposition, and instead changing the models that Tom referred to, the way ads are formulated and inserted into programs, the way they're produced, is probably a far more productive approach than thinking that somehow tomorrow consumers will wake up and see the light the way that we see the light. Of course there are better ways to do advertising. We can list a dozen in this room, or a dozen, but getting consumers to actually become a lean forward as opposed to a massive passive is a tough trick. It's a hard thing to do.
But companies program for masses often. I personally don't think the mass audience is going away tomorrow, and so that definitely predicates some of my thinking. I do think the gadgeteer is the most profitable, not the massive passive. So, but they're their volume. They are the annuity to fund those other growth initiatives, and I don't think they can be dismissed. But I do think you have to program for both and create probably ad models for both. That's my view, but I agree. And I was recently reading an article where Ford said, if I asked consumers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. So clearly, innovation doesn't. There are times when the suppliers just need to go for a vision, despite a lagging potential consumer group.
Right. One of the examples I used earlier, and I think Sangeeta did as well, is somebody who's interested in BMWs. That's great. Tell me about the guy who's interested in a Ford Escort. What's that guy going to do? Because if that guy starts doing what I would like him to do on a massive scale, all of a sudden there are many business models that can flourish. But until we're able to get the group of people who is sort of down the demographic scale a little bit to begin engaging with these, a lot of money will chase a little business, I think.
If we're talking about free ad-supported content, we've got to follow the dollars. And this is where Louisa already referred to this. Advertisers haven't adjusted for the shift from broadcast to cable yet, right? They're far from shifting from the adjustment from cable to video on demand or to DVR or whatever else. And so that's what will hold us back, I think. You'll find innovative programmers like us finding dollars in sort of new ways, but there aren't dollars to replace the broadcast market right now in any other format. And so that's going to continue to reward broadcasters for doing what they do. And I think it'll only be as this delayed conversion by advertisers from traditional broadcast media to something more innovative. It's only that's going to bring the rest of the market with them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there needs to be new business models, and certainly our approach is that we're going after some innovative advertisers, that have seen what we're doing and want to participate and see how it works out. I think going through agencies and sort of the mass agency mentality would never work for what we do. And so really, we're very focused on a few select advertisers that want to participate in this, this new type of advertising and see how it works out. One of the things that we have working in our favor again is that we're a mass market product, and so we can take on, just throwing out names, Procter & Gamble and Best Buy and Dodge and whoever, and show success, not only for the BMW customer but for overall. One of the things that we haven't touched on here is just how does VOD change programming? And we look at games as a new programming genre, and when you look at our trial stats, in the one market where we were actually marketed, we had 73% of the digital base playing free games in our channel. So you've got 3/4 of a digital base playing games in a channel. It's not niche anymore. And in fact, if we extrapolate out our numbers from our trials, we're a top 10 network. And so if you can get some key advertisers willing to take a risk with you, which they are, and prove the model, then I think it'll force other people to have to change.
And it does make you wonder how many other niches there are like that are unexplored, because nobody appreciates the power of casual games until you start looking at the numbers. And it's enormous. It crosses all demographics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, as I've said, I think there's a place both for a niche or a specialized or a more tech and fashion-forward consumer as well as for a mass consumer. And I don't necessarily think they have to be in opposition. I think that there can be two supply chains, two sets of strategies. And I think the iPod example for television is a great example. Almost 70% of the revenue split goes to the content owner. That gives them $1.30. And as Tom had said earlier, the average CPM per user is between 40 cents and 60 cents. And so now, it is not the case that the content owner is the same often as the network, but they are many times they are one and the same, not always. But that is that's a 3-to-1 advantage. So they don't have to live in opposition, but it is tricky because there are certain screens or tendencies that will cannibalize one another. And we saw that in music, there was probably $100 billion of value destruction due to industry inactivity. And I'm certainly not promoting inactivity, but I do think that often we at IBM as well, we have a tendency to believe that the world acts and looks like we do because we are tech savvy, because we're comfortable experimenting, because we're going to be the first to buy every device, upgrade every device 10 times faster than the average user, that our behavior can connote everybody's behavior. And so that's why we do this segmentation, and we believe that you can have a bifurcated set of strategies.
So IBM is telling us to be more zen?
Yes, we are in Northern California for a reason, exactly.
I really believe that there's just an evolution that's taking place, just like there always is. Things just change as the technologies drive them to change. And I think that they will coexist. I think that the different business models have to coexist because the different forms of broadcast will all be there. So I do think that it's a moving target. And from our perspective, because I'm not looking at it quite the same as everybody else on the panel, but from our perspective, it's something that you have to adapt to as your audience adapts and changes.
Great. Questions? You, sir, in the front.
Question probably for Tom.
And could you just identify yourself quickly?
Harry Sasaki with Digia. And what might happen in the future is something called network DVR.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so now the control of that DVR is kind of not in the consumer's direct hands. Two things possibly come out of that. One is a broadcaster or service provider can tell a lot more about that individual viewer because of past history of that household. So now you get much tighter demographics. And the second one is you actually, if you wanted to, turn off trick play. So that means you don't, that means maybe the viewer can't skip past portions of the ads and things like that. If that were to be the case, in that kind of scenario, how much more would that be worth to the advertiser?
The ability to identify the consumer probably gets you a substantial increase in the value of the placement because you know who you're dealing with, and you're doing more internet-like marketing to an identified consumer, so you don't have the Nielsen. Just, oh, you'll see CPMs that are just targeted CPMs between 30–50% premiums, if not more. It depends on who the consumer is and what the value of that consumer is. That's where some of the bidding things come in. On that network PVR thing, the biggest example is obviously Cablevision. And the one thing, the massive mistake they made is that they didn't go to the networks and propose some form of ad participation in the network DVR. They just proposed it trying to claim the inventory for themselves. And that's why the lawsuit occurred. So I think there's some interesting things on network PVR that we haven't thought through yet that have to do with business economics. The interesting one is Time Warner's Fast Start Over, where you've actually where a network VOD server, a network DVR, records the show during its broadcast, and you can start it over anytime during the broadcast sequence, and where the ad fast forwarding has been turned off. So you can watch the show in its entirety, but as it was broadcast, that's going to be the resounding success, I think. I think Time Warner has a hit on its hand there. The early stats of the field test are pretty substantial, but it's only there where the consumer perceives they're watching broadcast TV. If they perceive that they're in control and you're going to try to take back fast forward, forget it. It's just not going to occur. And the consumer likes being in control.
And to your earlier point, Time Warner has been pretty careful and diplomatic about implementing that. So Cablevision, you know, in sort of seizing the opportunity for those avails, they sort of stacked the deck a bit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the trick play is a bit of a red herring. I guess really the question is about that ability to better target.
Ability to better target is more important than turning off trick mode. Remember the advertiser, there's a woman from P&G named Nancy Dennis, and we coined the Dennis principle. She said, I don't want to advertise in a world or an environment where the consumer's already pissed off. And if you turn off trick mode, I won't advertise.
Ken.
Hey, Seth. First, I want to say to the panel thank you, because I think this is probably the most compelling panel I've seen in 3 days. The information is actually relevant and fresh. I think it's just your wonderful moderation.
I owe it.
That's your brother over there? What are you?
Next question.
You in the back.
Two things real quick. Tom, is there any chance I can get a copy of this? And where can I get a copy of this?
Yeah, just give me your card.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually he has another one. We had to switch computers right before this. He has another pie chart that I just can't show right now. It's also very good.
And then, hi Jeff. You and I met actually in January.
Good to see you again.
On time shifting on VOD, there's a point that nobody's really made so far. I think it's relevant. Maybe I just wasn't listening. But VOD is not a time shifting device. I agree with that. But one of the things that's really satisfying is the ability for me to watch the time amount that I want. So for instance, and 24 is a perfect example of a show that I hate. Because I loved 24 the first year. And every time it ended, I hated the show.
But you kept coming back though, didn't you?
No, I came back for the first season and then have never watched it since. Conversely, my parents learned about it 3 years after it started. They buy all 24. They watch it. So, same thing with us. We watch The Sopranos 3 or 4 episodes at a time now. And so I think the cool thing about the VOD too is it allows me to satisfy a time. It's not time shifting, but it's time filling, or it's time. We need a new term. But
oh yeah.
it's a really
It's whatever you want, whenever you want it. That's what it is. You get to make the choice.
But I think what he's getting at too is it does change the way you consume. The entertainment experience changes too. Just a quick one. I did the same thing with The Shield. I was traveling a lot, so I had a season pass full of like 10 episodes, and I had them all, and I watched 5 of them in a row. I think if I had first watched that show, just watching the pilot, I never would have come back. But having 3 in a row got me into it.
And the advertising opportunity is a monster because I am totally compelled for 4 hours or something, and so.
I totally see that. The point I was trying to get at is that relative to satellite, time shifting isn't really all that neat because satellite can do that as well in the form of a DVR, right? And so it's sort of competitive in terms of competitive positioning. It's more about offering unique product because that can't be offered by satellite. But I totally agree, and I think that smart program with sort of your outlook, and I think smart programmers would take advantage of that and let the VOD server serve as an opportunity for people to catch up and fall in love with shows, to watch the last season in order to get involved in the next season. And HBO is already doing it. I mean, HBO has turned video on demand programming into a science already, and I'm sure that a lot of those lessons will be followed by some of the major broadcasters.
Actually, that's a great idea because Universal has found that people are going to rip off their TV shows the next day on BitTorrent anyway, so they release them on iPods. It drives them back to linear.
Okay, great question. I knew I liked you. In the center there, in the blue shirt.
Ken Lyle, you one quick comment on that, like DVDs, they could probably start charging for a couple hours at a time. But I guess this question is for Rita, and it goes back to a comment about the ad avails and how they're available. Are you getting pressure from the operators to kind of open up a revenue share on some of the ads that you can put in interstitials, that maybe they want some of those interstitials to sell to their advertisers? Is that
Sure. So we launch like any other network does, and the operator gets X percentage of inventory that they can sell themselves. Yeah.
This lady in the front, black.
Hi. So sort of tying into the question 2 before, when are the programmers in the major broadcast networks going to become more smart? If HBO is already there and we're thinking that from a demand side with the audiences that there's a 3 to 5 year time frame when people are sort of start to accept these changes in technology. When are the ABC, CBS, when are they going to look at a different advertising model like what you have going on where they really, it does happen.
Well, ABC started the streaming experiment, right? So that's one. And NBC is actually starting to aggressively begin some VOD stuff.
How long do we think until they go wide with it?
But here's the fundamental problem. The reason ABC and NBC went over the net to experiment with their ad model was that they're in control of their avails over there. On VOD and DVR, they're not. In VOD and DVR, they have to work with the operator to say, what are you going to green light and what are you going to green light for me? And therein lies the business problem. It's an ad carriage problem, not a technology problem. They're smart. Look what they're doing over on broadband. And broadband is going to force the operators to open up. Because if not, everything's going to go broadband.
And also keep in mind, as interesting and successful as these new programs might be, they pale in comparison to the amount of money they make every night in primetime television. And so, it's not fair to assume that ABC is not being smart by being more aggressive. They are. The major networks are preserving their bread and butter and paying their bills. And I think they can afford to. I think this is also an important point, is that broadcast is still the lion's share of television advertising revenue, even though the majority of broadcast viewing is on cable. And that is a symptom of a lag in the evolution of sort of the paying customer. And it would be unwise for the broadcasters to evolve ahead of them.
And I guess what I might add is that just as the video on demand services, for example, just as the cable companies are being driven right now by by new opportunities, new availabilities that come from broadband, they'll also be driven by what happens on mobile phones. I absolutely believe that the networks are aggressively pursuing what to make available and what format to make it available on mobile phones. It's going to be a much larger market than it is today, and it will drive right back through the chain of production and advertising, both.
Okay, so we'll hold the floodgate of mobile for the next thing. Bill? No, oh, sorry. Yeah, I thought you were saying.
Yeah, my name's Frank Dunn. I'm an analyst within Verizon, actually, in the Video Pool Group. And I just want to get a comment on the panels. Last night, USA Today and the Associated Press came out with an announcement that a lot of colleges are bypassing television completely and now streaming all of their sports over the web. And in relation to that, we're also seeking out areas of advertising. And the local groups are jumping all over the place, bypassing all the advertising groups, bypassing the agencies, and bypassing anybody other than the direct distribution point of the colleges themselves who are broadcasting these sporting events on the web, which of course gives them control for broadband and IP environment.
Oh, you're saying the original content owners are bypassing the aggregators and the
networks? They're doing it right now. The announcement came out yesterday, USA Today and the Associated Press. Because I think what's happening is a lot of people are getting fed up with everything about telling them how to do it, what to do it. They know they got people inside, they have the ability to use broadband position to distribute their content live. Of course, it's already VOD on the fly. They already got their embedded advertising, track and monitor who they are on the streaming side. There's none of that stuff that needs to be controlled the company. They're knowing that they have all they need, basically, and that becomes an issue.
It's going to be real interesting to see what Michael Wolff and Jerry Bruckheimer do. But yeah, the real interesting question is how many, who's competent in selling advertising and who can really monetize that? Well, you might see some changes of the sort of the back end flow of who puts what to what market. But a network is, I sold a company to MTV a couple of years ago, and one of the VP of business development, I noticed that all the VPs of business development at Nickelodeon and MTV were all lawyers. And where I come from, business development people aren't. And I was going, why? He said, well, because we're rights licensing people. That's all we do. We buy rights to things, we package it up, and we learn how to sell advertising against it. And that's what we do. So the question is a college sports team capable of selling and marketing their product efficiently? Or does eventually you recompile it into something that is a little, so I don't know if a lot of people go direct or not. It's going to get interesting, but it's the real practical reality is, can you make money at doing it? Is bypass a real strategy, and how far back in the chain does it go? I don't know. Interesting trend.
Thanks, Frank. That was a good one. Anybody else?
Quickly coming back to NPVR, HP Baumeister. It looks to me like a no-brainer in a way. It's CPM is probably orders of magnitude higher if you do targeted advertising, and you can do it, let's say, in an IPTV environment. You don't need a truck roll, you don't need a new box, you don't need to rewire the house. So the barriers to entry, if you want, are much, much lower. So why is it that it's so contentious? And all that needs to happen is that operators and network.
Did you just say all that?
You answered your own question. Next. But that's it. It's the business relationships and the ad splits. It's not about technology. It's not about technology.
Anybody else? Yep.
Tom, you mentioned the operators need to open up. Do you think telcos with IPTV have an opportunity to?
I think that the telcos will open up first because they don't have an ad sales force that sells ads. The only ad sales force that telco has is the Yellow Page sales force. Good luck having a Yellow Page sales force sell ads. These kind of ads. So I think you'll see the innovation and the precedent setting done by AT&T and Verizon.
Okay, so I guess we have time for one last one up here. Anybody want to hazard a guess about where we are in a year or 5 years in any of this? Anybody see an emerging trend that they want to share with us so we can go back and look at the video and tell them they were wrong later? I guess when you ask the question that way, no one really wants to answer. No ideas about what's going to, yeah?
Well, I think that a couple things are clear. I don't think that moving away from what consumers want from these devices and in these technologies is a winner. The question out here about perhaps turning off trick play, I'd be really astounded. Why would the cable companies want to be less popular? I don't know. So I think that the feature set that's out there today is one that's going to get built on, not one that's going to get subtracted from.
In terms of research, is there anything that sort of jumps out?
I think what's going to happen in the next 5 years is we're really going to see a shakeout between new devices and new screens. And I think that in some cases it will be additive. I think a lot of it will be additive. I think a small screen like a mobile screen is not going to replace your main television screen. Maybe not a television set as we're used to, but a big screen with a big couch near it. But I think there is going to be some cannibalism. I think that's where most of our time and energy in the next 5 years will go. And I think the DVR touches to that a bit. But I think a lot of what we're going to see in the next 5 years is additive.
Hey Seth, I'll go halfway to making a prediction. I'm going to identify 2 trends that I think are going to be hugely influential in determining where we are 5 years from now. One is when you give consumers access to niche programming or previously unavailable programming and give them control, they consume more media, not less, right? So consumers will consume more media 5 years from now, substantially more. And then the other trend is advertisers are desperate to engage with customers. Desperate, and they're more than willing to pay for these new programming models. And so the winners will have isolated the intersection of those two trends, of finding ways to give consumers control and give them compelling niche programming, and finding ways to effectively use that to engage with advertisers.
That's great. Is it a zero-sum game? I mean, as this stuff adds and accretes and so forth, are there any losers on the horizon?
Sure. I think the aggregators who don't evolve will lose to
so
better, more interesting, more tailored aggregators. I think walled gardens who don't evolve will either lose to other walled gardens, like a telco who perhaps does something interesting, although I think the telco cable co thing is sort of tough, and I think the cable cos are favored for some time. Or they lose to an open environment altogether, particularly for the savvy user. Yes, I think there will be. I think there will be zero-sum mini games happening, but overall, I think that the consumption pie does grow, and so I think there are a good number of opportunities. I certainly think there are risks for many players involved, though.
That's great.
My only addition to that is I agree that I think consumers will be taking on more media over the next 5 years, but I think it also will be, it's not going to be TV, internet, and mobile as separately as it is today. I think that they are just really going to be going back and forth with their content wherever they want it, whatever device they want it on, and consuming more of it everywhere.
Tom?
I think when DVRs hit 25% and the ad skipping phenomena starts affecting the revenues of the major media companies to the point that their bond ratings decrease substantially, they will, as a group, be forced to go to the operators and will have some form of settlement in this industry, and I'll put it forward in the next 24 months.
Wow. Do you want to be more specific?
1235.
Anyway, we're done? Is that what you're, okay. One last question. We're here. No? Okay. Yep, go ahead.
I was just curious about the data here. If you overlay that with the expenditure for advertising,
yeah.
You take it back 5 years, and a lot of these things didn't exist, but the numbers are so small. And what I'm hearing is the advertising mix hasn't really changed.
Well, this year upfront was the first sort of flat to down upfront. We think this was a major sort of phase shift, and that the next 2 upfronts will be particularly rocky.
That's true, but the upfronts have been difficult over the last number of years. They just put a nice spin on it. But
I agree with that.
Going way back, that every year I can remember they say, oh, the upfronts have been, it's been longer and longer and longer, and we're pushing it out further till everything is sold. So.
Many forecasters are still looking at broadcast television advertising. Now, admittedly, most forecasters aren't forecasting for high levels of disruption, but they're still looking above the level of inflation in terms of growth. So they're still saying, despite all these changes, that broadcast advertising will still garner above the rate of inflation, so 4 or 5% growth. Now, again, all that can be contended. Certainly, by your analysis, you would say there's going to be a precipitous fall, but others are saying that things take a longer period of time to shake down.
Yeah. Well,
we'll come back next year. Yeah. Okay, so I guess that's it. Thank you all. This has been great, and thank you for coming and hanging out on the